Welcome back, everyone, to Stay in Your Lane podcast. I'm your host today, John Mahle, brought to you by Triple T Transport. First timer with us today. This gentleman, I've seen him all over, and most of you will know him. But it's my first time getting to interview and have a real sit down. Todd Spencer from OOIDA. He's the president, very passionate speaker in our industry, a great sounding board for a lot of people, myself included. So I've got the pleasure of having Todd on with us. Todd, if you'd like to say hi to everyone.
Hey, John, I would glad to say hi to everyone. Again, Todd Spencer, president of OOIDA. I got into trucking after leaving the military and shortly after 1974. In 1976, became an owner-operator, surely convinced that if I was willing to work hard, I could do pretty well. Well, obviously, I didn't know a whole lot about trucking then. And I've learned a lot more about trucking since then. I've also learned one of the things that resonated with me way back then is that the cards are oftentimes stacked against the little guys in our business, and OOIDA is all about trying to level the playing field to make sure that those folks that want to do it the right way have the opportunity to be successful.
Well, I think you said a lot there. You said a lot. I think everyone that understands our industry or has been close to it at any level will understand, the different issues that come up, the ELDs, the speed limiters. This industry's changed a lot in 11 years, and I would say that a lot of the time, the impact isn't really realized until after the fact.
Well, way after the fact, the ELD law, which is one that, we vehemently opposed pretty much throughout the life of the organization when, the feasibility of something like that first came along. But that legislation passed through Congress in 2012.
Right.
Now, it passed through Congress simply because it never would have been issued as a federal regulation simply because it would never survive a cost benefit. But if Congress requires it, as they ultimately did, then that issue goes away. And the method to the madness with ELDs is bigger carriers. They like regulation. They like regulation that applies to their competition. Right. And the more of it they can have, and that's true with ELDs, that's going to be true with speed limiters, all of these things. Right. We spend a lot of time talking about government sitting around conspiring to come up with regulations to hurt people. Well, there actually are always going to be people behind those regulations, proponents of those regulations. And unfortunately, or in reality, in trucking, generally it's the bigger folks that they like them.
Now, if the ELD, and we're getting off subject here, but I gotta ask this: if ELDs were going to make things so much safer over the road,
theoretically, the rationale for requiring them is, well, these are just hours of service regulations. Okay, and we're just going to enforce hours of service regulations. Well, if there's going to be a connection between hours of service regulations and safety, you'd think safety would get better.
Right, and that's where I'm going.
Case.
No, it's actually gotten worse, but I think we know why. I think you're on to it.
From our perspective, we say, wait a minute, I think this calls for a timeout. Let's look and see what's really going on. If you address the real issues, right, then you're going to be much more likely to have a better safety outcome.
Right. Oh, I agree 100%. So in the past 11 years, we're going to be talking about the subject that you guys have really pushed for, and you're behind it. And this is the English-speaking enforcement.
Yep.
Okay, the executive order that came through last week.
Oh, yeah. Well, the issue of communication, the role of being able to effectively communicate with others on the road certainly to a driver, it couldn't be more evident. Right. And you used the term 11 years. Well, 11 years ago, was when the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, now this is a group of truck inspectors, the people that stop trucks and do inspections and check to make sure that they're in compliance with the regulations. 11 years ago, they made the decision that we're no longer going to place drivers out of service that can't communicate in English. And now, the out of service was the penalty. The regulation has always been there.
Right,
Drivers
it's been the law.
should be able. That's right. Drivers should be able to communicate, and the rationale behind that is pretty obvious. In that, it's important to be able to communicate with others. It's going to be important to be able to read road signs and follow directions for all kinds of situations. Oftentimes, bad weather, things like that. That's on road signs, and these things are important elements of highway safety. And obviously, we didn't think the enforcement community should arbitrarily make the decision that we're no longer going to enforce this.
Right. I mean, you there's a process that you should go through, and but the reality is, my question is motivation. What's the motivation?
Their motivation?
Uh-huh.
Well, I couldn't necessarily speak for other people, but I can tell you it's my opinion that it's really for law enforcement, and certainly in many instances, and I won't say all, but in many instances, it was just a hassle for them. If you're going to place a driver out of service and a truck out of service, what do? Then suddenly you become the babysitter. And
Correct.
so there may or may not be another qualified driver that's ever going to come and take that load away. So again, that becomes an issue for you. And they didn't want that issue. And then the other kind of the rest of the story there is that if you're an inspector and you've got a truck pulled over for inspection and you're going to crawl under it to adjust brakes and things like that, drivers are asked to participate in that whole process.
Right.
The inspectors probably conclude that if they lack the ability to realistically communicate with the driver, well, then it's not safe for the inspector to inspect that truck. So
That makes perfect sense.
well, yeah. So what's the remedy for them? The remedy is let that truck go right on down the road.
Well, but that makes the liability out there for the public.
Well, it certainly creates a potentially unsafe situation for the public, and all those folks did was just simply pass the buck. From our perspective, if it's a safety regulation, enforce it.
Okay. In 2014, George, I got to thank George because he sent me his pocket guide information here. This is astonishing. In 2014, it was the second highest out of service penalty given, 101,280 times. Second to a log violation, either error or not keeping up the logbook, at 163,000 violations. So in 2014, over 101,000 times, there was a violation for a non-English speaking driver. Now, the difficult part here is when they removed it from enforcement, from not putting the driver out of service, maybe they didn't have enough room in the truck stops or in the scale house behind the scale to set the driver for 12 hours, etc. But it appears that once they stopped enforcing it, then they stopped keeping data on it because it wasn't anything to pay attention to.
Well, again, this would be a question for other people as well. But in my opinion, again, the inspectors, the law enforcement officers on the front lines in those situations, in many instances, just kind of concluded, this is a problem that I don't need. I'm going to let it go right on down the road.
Right. For all of us.
And you're talking about in 2014, the suspicion that the suspicion that there could be a connection between safety and the lack of English proficiency had been around for a decade previously. And information started being gathered And that information said basically, you should have concluded from that information that further study was needed. And there was another study that looked at this, that was supposed to have had a final report written in 2018. Now, they did the study, but there was never any final report. And, no reason for that other than probably they didn't look closely enough at the right things to actually come to any conclusion. So, that part of it's pretty frustrating. We strongly suspected there was a problem based on all of the data, and we knew we should look at it, but we didn't.
So how's insurance been the past, 6 to 10 years?
Well,
I know the answer.
I think basically anybody that pays much attention in trucking knows that plaintiff lawsuits for spectacular crashes and plaintiff lawsuits for crashes that, clearly that the trucker should not have had any responsibility whatsoever have pretty much gone, that they've gone into the stratosphere.
Correct.
There is, $100 million lawsuits. That isn't even shocking anymore because they happen with such frequency. And again, in instances where there's absolutely no negligence whatsoever.
I remember the one on the trailer's ICC bumper. For one lawsuit, I believe it was the ICC bumper. They said wasn't sufficient, but it was the one that was manufactured with and not damaged.
I know.
Before the accident. So
it's crazy stuff.
It is, between the attorneys and maybe the legislation and insurance companies. It's a tough game.
Well,
we're in the middle. So let's talk about this. You guys pushed an executive order. It's going to take about 60 days for us to understand how it's going to be enforced. Now, different industries, this would hurt different industries and impact them. The question is, what do you really see happening in the trucking industry?
Well, in trucking, trucking is different than those other industries that you mentioned, where limited or people that don't speak English are common. And trucking is different in that this very much is a highway safety issue, and it's pretty important. It's important to keep in mind that these regulations don't require you to be especially fluent in English, but English fluent enough that you understand the regulations and that you can comply with the regulations.
And read the roadsides and understand what's coming up at the end of the road.
So, and we believe that these are things that certainly can be taught and should be taught, and they should be verified in the testing and training process that goes along for every new driver.
Well,
That's
the law.
Absolutely. That's where the qualifications should be verified. And of course, OOIDA is the only organization that forever advocated required training for entry-level truck drivers. Until about 2 years ago, for the entire life of the trucking industry, there was never any requirements that people given a license to drive a big truck actually had to be trained. We thought that was the biggest safety mistake you could ever possibly have. But again, beneficiaries of the system don't make much noise if they benefit from it. And bigger carriers and others, they like quickie drivers. They like to be able to recruit them and put them behind the wheel and on the road quick. And generally that means there's not any training at all or not much.
Continue watching on the next episode of the Stay in Your Lane podcast.